Some Bucs fans just don't like Jameis Winston or Ronald Jones. There's a small group of Bucs fans who are now pressuring the Buccaneers organization to find a new long-term solution at the quarterback and running back position. But what if I told you things could be a whole lot worse? What if I told you that back in the mid-80s, the Buccaneers had the opportunity to have 49ers legend and Hall of Famer Steve Young and Raiders legend Bo Jackson on the same team? Let me explain. Let's start with Steve Young, the Buccaneers supplemental draft quarterback to the 49ers legend. The 1983 and 1984 seasons were, like most of the years prior to this point, very rough years for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They finished with an overall record of 6 wins and 24 losses in those 2 seasons, which would result in the firing of John McKay, who was the longtime and first ever head coach of the organization. Both of those years' quarterbacks included a lot of random names, including Jack Thompson, Jerry Goldstein, and Steve DeBerg. So the Buccaneers needed a brand new quarterback option that had the potential to be a long-term, potentially franchise quarterback for this team, and they decided to take Steve Young in the first round of the 1984 supplemental draft. But he would not play for the Bucs and new head coach Leeman Bennett until the 1985 season. Now, Young had played for the USFL Los Angeles Express before getting drafted by the Bucs, and he would sign an unprecedented 43-year contract worth $40 million for the Express at that time, and he would eventually leave after 2 years in his contract. Now, like I said, Steve Young did not play for the Buccaneers until 1985, and he would have 2 seasons with the Bucs, and he put up the stats of 19 starts, a 3-win, 16-loss record, 11 touchdowns, and 21 interceptions. After his second season with the team, then head coach Leeman Bennett was then fired, and he was replaced by new head coach Ray Perkins, who was not the biggest fan of Steve Young, and who would eventually trade him away to the San Francisco 49ers. 49ers would trade away a 2nd and a 4th round pick for Steve Young, which would eventually turn into linebacker Winston Moss in the 2nd round and wide receiver Bruce Hill in the 4th round for the Buccaneers. The main reason that the 49ers traded for Steve Young is because they were becoming more concerned with their legendary quarterback Joe Montana's health, and Bill Walsh saw some things that he liked in Steve Young, such as his mobility, his quick release, among many other things. Now, the main reason that the Buccaneers traded away Steve Young is because they wanted to use what they thought was their brand new franchise quarterback, Vinny Testaverde, who was drafted with the #1 overall pick in the 1987 NFL Draft. And, well, you guys basically know the remainder of the story here. Steve Young would go on to play the remainder of his career in San Francisco. He would be a multiple-time Super Bowl winner, go to multiple Pro Bowls, and eventually be an NFL Hall of Famer. Let's just say that Vinny Testaverde was not as lucky. He would play 6 years with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, have twice as many losses as wins, as he would finish with a 24-win and 48-loss record with the Bucs. He would throw 77 touchdowns to 112 interceptions, and he would eventually become a journeyman quarterback in the league and wouldn't really maintain a long-term standing for any other NFL team. Then head coach Ray Perkins, who was not a fan of Steve Young, lasted only 3 seasons with the Buccaneers and had a final head coaching record with the Bucs of 19 wins and 41 losses. He never became a head coach for another team in the NFL. But what about the 2 players that the Buccaneers got in the draft picks that the 49ers gave him? Well, Winston Moss only lasted 4 years with the Buccaneers until he eventually joined the LA Rams, where he would be a solid but not too impressive starter for them. Bruce Hill only lasted 5 years on the Buccaneers and overall in the NFL before he was out of the league entirely. He only had one 1,000 receiving yard season, and that was in his 2nd year on the team. But I guess if you had to have a bright side here, this is the only time the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have ever traded away a future Hall of Famer in the existence of their franchise. So I guess that's a pretty good thing. Moving on to Bo Jackson, the player who chose baseball instead of the Bucs. Now, Jackson was supposed to be the surest thing in the 1986 NFL Draft as he finished his final season at Auburn, rushing for almost 1,800 rushing yards and 17 touchdowns, and he was presumed by some to go #1 overall to the Buccaneers after the end of the season. The Buccaneers had even brought Jackson in for a visit on a private plane and insisted to Jackson that it followed the NCAA guidelines for players visiting NFL teams so that he was still going to be able to play his senior season of baseball. However, this was not the case. Therefore, Jackson was not able to play his senior season of college baseball. Jackson would go on to accuse the Buccaneers of trying to ruin his chances of playing baseball in the pros and lying to him and get him to eventually play football. Jackson would vow to not play for the Buccaneers if they drafted him, but they did instead. Jackson stayed true to his word and would spend the 1986 NFL season playing baseball for the Memphis Chicks and eventually getting called up into the major leagues playing for the Kansas City Royals. Here's the kicker. Bo Jackson would then be drafted by the Los Angeles Raiders in the 7th round of the same draft, and then Raiders owner Al Davis would give Jackson a contract that would not only make him one of the highest paid running backs at the time, but would also allow him to play baseball and then join the team once the season was over. So, after the baseball season, Jackson would then join the Los Angeles Raiders, but Jackson's career would only last 38 games until a hip injury would eventually put him out of football permanently. He would finish his career with a career average of 5.4 yards per carry and would go down as one of the greatest what-ifs in football history, as it seemed he had the talent to be one of the greatest running backs of all time. Here's the worst part. What did the Buccaneers get out of this situation, you may be asking? Nothing. They had released their rights to Bo Jackson and had received no compensation in doing so, since they were the ones who took the risk in drafting him. The Raiders arguably got one of the best running backs possibly of that time and one of the best two-sport athletes of that time, and the Buccaneers got nothing. Notice how I said that Bo Jackson was one of the surest things of the 1986 NFL Draft. Taking into account that Steve Young was taken in the 1984 supplemental draft but wouldn't play until the 1985 season, if the Buccaneers would have just given Steve Young a little bit more time and not been so cruel to Bo Jackson and would have not lied to him and let him play his senior season of baseball, there was a realistic chance that both Steve Young and Bo Jackson could have played their entire football careers for the Bucs. How would that have gone? Well, we'll never know, but I will say that when Steve Young was with the Bucs, he did not have some very good teams around him, and adding a running back like Bo Jackson would have been huge, would have been absolutely huge. Maybe Bo Jackson does not get that hip injury, maybe the Buccaneers gave him an Al Davis-like contract where he could play baseball and football at the same time, and maybe the Buccaneers would have had one of the most legendary duos in the entire history of football. But that wasn't the case, and the Buccaneers missed out on having Steve Young and Bo Jackson on the same team. So guys, when you ever think to yourselves, whenever you get sick of a Buccaneers quarterback or a Buccaneers running back like Ronald Jones or Peyton Barber or Jameis Winston, always remember, always remember that things could be a lot worse. Just ask some Bucs fans from the mid-'80s and I'm sure they will tell you. But that's all I have for today's video. Let me know what you guys think about this entire situation down in the comment section below. What are your thoughts on Steve Young and Bo Jackson, and how do you think the Buccaneers handled this situation? Do you think that they gave Steve Young enough time? Do you think that they were cruel to Bo Jackson, or was Bo Jackson being a little bit too emotional? Let me know all of it down in the comment section below. Hope you all enjoyed this video, and as always, I will see you in the next one. But until then, and as always, goodbye for now, and go Bucs.